We're back to the Dark Ages, or what is this, the Dark Ages? These expressions have become part of common talking points for many languages around the world. Indeed, the idea that a good chunk of Europe's Middle Ages was spent in social, technological and political stagnation, an era of darkness if you will, is a well-enduring idea in our collective imaginations. However, is this rooted in the reality of how historians have come to understand the medieval era? What are these famous Dark Ages, and did they even exist? Today we will explore historiography in an attempt to shed some light on this commonly heard but rarely understood period of history. Welcome to our video where we explore the question, what were the Dark Ages and how dark were they really?
There's at least one thing that came out of those times and lasted all the way to today: titles such as Lord and Lady. And we know this for sure because there's a way to buy these titles through our sponsor, Established Titles. They sell small plots of land in Scotland, which are sought after because of a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. But to protect these lands, a tree is planted with every order, and Established Titles supports charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. So it's a fun and novel way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland, while helping global reforestation efforts. You'll get at least 1 square foot of land in Scotland with a unique plot number and a certificate to prove it. This allows you to officially get Lord or Lady on your credit cards, plane tickets and more. You can also get maps to show your new estate, including the immensely detailed, hand-drawn 1611 map by John Speed, held by the National Library of Scotland. It makes a great last-minute gift, and they even have couple packs that come with adjoining plots of land. The first 200 plots bought via our link will all be put together within a few minutes of each other next to the Kings and Generals plot, so act fast to join our little union of forest territories. Check out their Black Friday sale for discounts. Plus, if you use our code KINGS, you'll get an extra 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/kings to get yourself a title or give it as a gift and help support the channel.
The medieval era is as fascinating as it is complex, a time when burgeoning trade coexisted with bloody conflicts and deadly plague coexisted with brilliant literary works, an age characterized by moments of technological stagnation, yet constellated with remarkable innovations in many fields. With this complexity comes the challenging task of dividing and categorizing the Middle Ages into different phases. While there is no definitive date to signify the beginning of this historical chapter, the most popular one is the year 476 AD, which coincides with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The moments picked to signify the Middle Ages' end also vary, from the fall of Constantinople in 1453 to the more classic discovery of the Americas in 1492. Whatever the preferred date might be, it is clear that this massive millennium-long period as a whole needs to be fractured into different phases. Historians from Romance-speaking countries typically divide the Middle Ages into 2 periods, the High and the Low. English-speaking historians, on the other hand, commonly split the Middle Ages into 3 time periods: Early, High and Late, or in some cases 4, with the Low Middle Ages added between High and Late. All of this leads us back to our original question: where do the Dark Ages fit into all this? In the 1330s, the Tuscan scholar Petrarch was the first to introduce the theory of a Dark Age. Writing some 9 centuries after the fall of Western Rome, he stated, "Amidst the errors there shone forth men of genius. No less keen were their eyes, although they were surrounded by darkness and dense gloom." Christian writers, including Petrarch, had long employed classical metaphors, such as light versus darkness, to express good versus evil in spiritual matters. Petrarch, however, was the first to give the metaphor secular significance. He saw classical antiquity, the era of Caesar and Augustus, in the light of its cultural achievements, whereas Petrarch's own time, allegedly without such artistic triumphs, was regarded as a dark age. Petrarch considered classical antiquity to be an expression of splendor, especially since he was a native of the Italian peninsula, once the beating heart of what had been the greatest ancient civilization in Europe. As an itinerant scholar, Petrarch traveled extensively across Europe, uncovering and republishing classical Latin and Greek writings. These volumes influenced him into believing that ancient times were enlightened when compared to the relative scarcity of surviving literary works from more recent centuries. In 1343, Petrarch would solidify his concept of a dark age in the conclusion of his epic Africa. "My fate is to live among varied and confusing storms, but for you perhaps, if as I hope and wish you will live long after me, there will follow a better age. This sleep of forgetfulness will not last forever. When the darkness has been dispersed, our descendants can come again in the former pure radiance." The trend set by Petrarch would continue throughout the centuries by way of other authors' works. In the 15th century, Italian historians Leonardo Bruni and Flavio Biondo established a three-tier model of history. They defined history using Petrarch's two ages, the enlightened antique era and the dark, ignorant Middle Ages, while also adding on a new age, a current, better age, which they thought their world had entered. The word Middle Ages derived from the Latin media tempestus, storm of the middle, that was used to denote that period of apparent decline between the Enlightenment of the ancient Romans and the rediscovery of their glory in the 1400s, the so-called Renaissance. During the 16th and 17th centuries, as Europe was thrown into bloody religious wars, the birth of Protestantism and the subsequent Catholic Counter-Reformation gave rise to new interpretations of the Dark Ages. Although Protestant thinkers generally held views comparable to humanists such as Petrarch, they added an anti-Catholic stance. They saw classical antiquity as a golden age, not just for its Latin literature, but also since Christianity began in that era. The ancients witnessed the faith of Jesus in its purest, most sincere form. The Protestants pushed the notion that the Middle Ages were a period of darkness due to corruption inside the Catholic Church, such as popes ruling as kings, worship of saints' relics, a debauched priesthood, and institutionalized moral hypocrisy. In reaction to the Protestants, the Catholics created a counter-image that portrayed the High Middle Ages in particular as a period of social and religious stability, in contrast with the religious schisms and ensuing wars that plagued the 16th and 17th centuries, rather than a period of darkness. At the center of this movement was Italian cardinal and historian Cesare Baronius. His widely acclaimed Annales Ecclesiastici was published in 12 volumes between 1588 and 1607, and covered the first 12 centuries of Christian history up to the year 1198. The epithet Dark Age was coined by Baronius in his Annales to describe the collapse of the Carolingian Empire in 888 and the first stirrings of Gregorian reform under Pope Clement II in 1046. The new age, Saeculum, that was beginning, for its harshness and barrenness of good could well be called iron, for its baseness and abounding evil, leaden, and moreover for its lack of writers could be called dark, obscurum. Significantly, it was mainly because of the scarcity of written records that Baronius referred to the period as dark. There was a dark age in the sense of a shortage of writings between the Carolingian Renaissance in the 9th century and the beginnings of what has been dubbed the Renaissance of the 12th century. Furthermore, there was a shortage of writings period in the 7th and 8th centuries too. As a result, two dark ages can actually be traced in Western Europe, separated by the luminous but short Carolingian Renaissance of the 9th century. Baronius's Dark Age appears to have inspired historians, as the term began to spread to various European languages in the 17th century, with his original Latin name, Saeculum Obscurum, reserved for the period he had applied it to. However, although some, like Baronius, used the term neutrally to refer to a lack of written records, many others used it negatively. The first British historian to adapt Baronius's term probably was Scottish Bishop Gilbert Burnet in the late 17th century. In his works, his usage of the term was universally negative and tinged in the worldview of a Protestant thinker with anti-Catholic views. In 1679, he writes, "The design of the Protestant Reformation was to restore Christianity to what it was at first, and to purge it of those corruptions with which it was overrun in the later and darker ages." Thus once more invoking the Protestant view of the Dark Ages as an era of debauched church corruption in the Middle Ages. He again uses the term a few years later, dismissing the legend of St. George fighting the dragon, as a legend formed in the Darker Ages to support the humour of chivalry. So far, we have covered the story of how the idea of a Dark Age progressed throughout time up until the 17th century. But it would be in the centuries after this that the term took on its most pessimistic meaning. In the 18th century, the advent of Enlightenment brought with it a general air of hostility towards religion and irrationality in academic and philosophical circles all over Western Europe. Many thinkers of the period saw religion as antithetical to reason. For them, the Middle Ages, or Age of Faith as they called it, was the polar opposite of the Age of Reason they currently lived in, and something to be deplored, as it embodied the despotic, priest-infested world they were working to change. Spinoza, Kant, Thomas Jefferson, Rousseau and Diderot, among others, were extremely blunt in their critique of the Middle Ages as a period of social regress driven by religion and superstition. In trying to explain why the Middle Ages were the way they were, German philosopher Immanuel Kant came up with the idea that humankind had lost its mind during the Middle Ages. He claimed that a time of collective insanity had halted the onward march of development and reason, which had only been restarted with himself and the Enlightenment. This meant that even the period between the Middle Ages and the Enlightenment was now considered part of the Dark Ages. Voltaire, meanwhile, went so far as to encourage contemporaries to study medieval history just to find more things to mock and better ridicule the period. Even an English Member of Parliament and historian, Edward Gibbon, expressed contempt for what he called the rubbish of the Dark Ages. As we have seen, Enlightenment thinkers were condemning centuries before their own, feeling themselves on the verge of a new age, just like Petrarch had done 4 centuries before. Knowing all this, we can see that by the 18th century, the concept of a Dark Age had changed significantly over time. Petrarch's original metaphor of light versus darkness has evolved. Even the later humanists of the 15th and 16th centuries, who did not see themselves as living in a Dark Age, were not enlightened enough for the 18th century writers who considered themselves as living in the true Age of Enlightenment, while the period to be condemned extended up to what we now call early modern times. Furthermore, Petrarch's metaphor of darkness, which he primarily used to lament what he viewed as a lack of secular progress, was sharpened to take on an explicitly anti-religious and anti-clerical significance. In the early 19th century, things would shift. The opinion on the Middle Ages would flip on its head and take a surprisingly positive turn. In contrast with the Enlightenment thinkers, a new growing movement, the Romantics, held a particular attraction to the remote and the mysterious, and a strong resentment towards the emerging Industrial Revolution. They liked to portray the Middle Ages as a time of great social harmony, when everyone accepted his or her place in society. They described the Middle Ages as an aesthetically attractive age. The water was clear, and the green fields that were now being supplanted by grey factories dominated the landscape. They also saw it as a time when emotion was allowed to run wild, not dominated by cold reason. Again in contrast with the Enlightenment. The literary works glorifying the Middle Ages produced in this time are many, but outside of that, one particular example is the revival of medieval-style Gothic architecture. The word Gothic had so far been a derogatory one, similar to Vandal. But in the early 19th century, Romantic enthusiasts of the Middle Ages gave the term a new meaning through the so-called Gothic Revival. The Gothic Revival drew on medieval elements such as lancet windows, finials and ornamental patterns, and numerous Gothic cathedrals and basilicas started being built all over Europe and beyond. By the mid-19th century, Gothic had risen in popularity as the dominant architectural style in the Western world. In the second half of the 19th century, especially during what is known as the Victorian era, the Romantic movement had died. With its fallout of fashion, the Middle Ages started to be seen as a period of overall backwardness again. But surprisingly, the era of knights and castles held an aura of mystery and charm to the literate masses of the Victorian age. Most Victorians likely considered the Middle Ages as a time of contrasts, of beauty, romance and chivalry, as well as oppression, ignorance and fanaticism. People of the time largely derived their opinions about the wonders of the medieval period from art, literature and architecture, as well as from Enlightenment literature, which carried preconceptions against medieval ignorance. Unfortunately, the notions spread by the many pieces of literature about the Middle Ages, like Tennyson's Idylls of the King, were more often than not born out of myth. The end result was a knowledge of the period very low in historical accuracy, which birthed many misconceptions still alive today. But as we've seen, it was still accompanied by general interest and fascination with the period. This roots us back to our main point, that the meaning of the term Dark Ages has changed over time. While Petrarch's initial idea was that of an era lacking in cultural achievements and literary works, the Protestants of the 16th and 17th centuries warped it into a critique of the Church's corruption, and their Catholic counterparts, led by Baronius, shifted the attention to a scarcity of written production. Then in the 18th century, the Enlightenment thinkers started a harsh condemnation of the past's supposed superstitiousness and a lack of critical thinking, only for the Romantics a few decades later to start idealizing the period as a hub of social harmony and lush natural landscapes, and for the Victorians to see it as an often bleak yet fascinating phase of history. Within all these different and evolving viewpoints, the time span identifiable with these Dark Ages also changed depending on the period and who you asked. Petrarch thought they extended from the fall of Rome to his own times. The counter-reformist historian Baronius completely changed things, claiming that the Dark Ages only started with the fracturing of the Carolingian state in 888 and ended in 1046 with the first Gregorian reforms. Finally, Enlightenment authors like Kant affirmed the period in question lasted throughout the whole Middle Ages all the way up to the 18th century. As we can see, it's a very complicated subject. Luckily, modern historians have shed some light on the confusing mess that is the notorious Dark Ages. The 20th century saw a major re-evaluation of the Middle Ages, which called into doubt the word dark being used to define the time up to that point, or at least its more derogatory meaning. Dennis Hayes, a historian, exemplified the new academic stance on medieval times when he talked sarcastically in 1977 of the lively centuries which we call dark. Most modern historians don't use the term Dark Ages anymore, and while some still use it, they do so only referring to specific circumstances and moments in history, inside and even outside of the Middle Ages. Others believe the term must be instead used neutrally, claiming that periods like the medieval one only appear dark to us because of the scarcity of surviving written sources, which tends to cover the time's reality in mystery. However, beginning in the late 20th century, other historians began to question even this non-judgmental usage of the term. The reason behind this stance is their belief in the fact that the medieval period is not dark to us anymore thanks to the better understanding we now have of its culture and history. While the scholarly debate is still open, the whole period is now finally being looked at through a more objective lens, after centuries of misconceptions, misinterpretations, and even ridicule. With modern studies, the medieval age, for so long classified as one of backwardness, was proven to have been one of vibrant colours, flowering trade, intellectual liveliness, and innovations that range from the economic field to the legal and manufacturing ones, but that is a story for another time. Thanks again to our sponsor, Established Titles. Buy a small plot of land in Scotland and become a lady or a lord, or give this title as an amazing and easy gift. In return, Established Titles plants a tree to protect the pristine forests of our planet. Take advantage of their Black Friday sale and use our discount code KINGS at establishedtitles.com/kings to get a further 10% off. We'll explore more of the Middle Ages' fascinating history in the future, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.